Hey guys. Tonight we'll travel back through time to meet Henry VIII, the king infamous for his merciless rage, who wouldn't hesitate to behead his wife in the blink of an eye. Yet few know he was also a remarkably talented musician and an avid animal lover. Henry was a man of contradictions. Today, I'm going to reveal some strange facts about him that you've almost certainly never heard before. You won't survive witnessing the brutal secrets hidden beneath the crown. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Leave a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. With the hushed atmosphere already set, and the gentle whir of a fan in your ear, let us quietly step into the first part of our journey through the conflicted tragedy named Henry VIII. This Tudor monarch is remembered not only as the brutal husband whose wrath drove him to coldly behead several of his wives in the blink of an eye, but also as a man with a remarkable musical gift and a passionate love for animals. Henry VIII was truly a complex figure, capable of presiding majestically on a throne, yet just as capable of lifting his voice in a melancholy song or galloping across the fields with his stable of horses. Within the royal household, the legend of the king's power was woven through the figure of his most loyal attendants. Though the roster of guards numbered in the hundreds, only 4 individuals held the title Groom of the Stool, a euphemistic name for the person who attended to the king's most private sanitary needs. Seemingly menial, this role was in fact a rare mark of status. Whoever earned the king's trust and laid claim to that little stool would bask in the echo of the monarch's closest confidant, and wield an invisible authority reserved for only those 4 lucky souls throughout the entire realm. Far more than simply handing towels or emptying chamber pots, the groom of the stool controlled the king's schedule, managed his wardrobe, and even oversaw the royal seal bearing the king's signature. Armed with these powers, they decided who might have an audience with the king, who might be judged, and who might receive generous loans from the treasury. Each stamped document was effectively a VIP pass to lucrative dealings, elevating the groom of the stool to the stature of a second king within the shadowy court. It was precisely through these seemingly trivial functions that the Tudor dynasty built a sophisticated power nest, enabling the king to keep both his subjects and his nobles firmly under control. Henry VIII understood the potency of proximity. If you cannot place your rival before the sword, place them in a role that makes them inseparable from your daily routine. Whenever a harsh verdict needed to be delivered, a whispered instruction through the groom's lips sufficed to enact it immediately. This honored attendant did not merely oversee the material trappings of the throne, but held the monarch's private secrets in their hands. They witnessed every moment as the king dressed and undressed before and after attending to his natural business, heard his labored breathing through the wood-paneled door, and promptly relayed every detail to loyal advisers. Political machinations and courtly intrigues often originated from the groom's whispered counsel, making their role all the more perilous and potent. Yet such power carried enormous risk. If the king's wrath flared or suspicions of betrayal arose, even his closest confidants had mere seconds to beg for mercy before the executioner's blade. The fate of the great minister Thomas Wolsey, once the most powerful man in the realm, then cast down in disgrace after a single act of defiance, stands as vivid proof of the unlimited, yet fragile, the power of the man who stood closest to the king. To onlookers, the image of the groom of the stool was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. They could turn a commoner into a millionaire, or consign a noble to the gallows with a single stamped line. Each time Henry VIII extinguished a life, he needed only raise his pen to paper. No direct confrontation was required. And the indispensable intermediary in every one of these fateful moments was none other than the groom of the stool. Yet behind these calculated maneuvers, an absolute authority, Henry VIII still allowed himself rare moments of peaceful respite. When the gentle notes of his recorder rang out, or the thunder of hooves carried him across the rolling fields, one glimpsed a man yearning for harmony with art and nature. This was the perfect counterpoint to the cold Iron Throne, where unbridled power weighed upon the breath of anyone who dared approach. From this, we begin to understand why history recalls Henry VIII with both reverence and horror. He built his empire with a sharp sword and cemented his throne with a seemingly humble stool. It is in these minute details placed in the hands of those who thirst for power that the silent weapons of fear were forged throughout the dark corridors of the court. And only by examining the role of the groom of the stool do we realize that true influence resides in the smallest of crevices, where the mortal world and the divine collide, between fresh blood and the echo of music. In his prime, Henry VIII used to hunt vigorously in the woods, lift weights for hours, and maintain a sculpted physique that earned the admiration of many knights. Yet, upon reaching his 40th year, the king began to gain weight uncontrollably. According to contemporary chroniclers, his weight at one point soared to 400 pounds, approximately 180 kilograms, while his waist expanded beyond 50 inches, over 127 centimeters. That colossal frame not only made the throne room feel cramped, but turned every banquet and procession into a tremendous physical and mental burden as his body became increasingly corpulent. Henry found himself unable to mount his warhorse without a specially designed crane. This elaborate contraption was engineered to lift him high into the air and then gently lower him into the saddle, much to the astonishment of the cavalry officers. Some scholars even speculate that, after bouts of prolonged illness, he was forced to use a rudimentary wheelchair within the palace. Each step he took lacked agility, and every effort to mount his horse required the labor of numerous attendants, gradually eroding the image of the once regal, athletic monarch. Amid mounting tension over the lack of a legitimate male heir from his first wife, Princess Catherine of Aragon, Henry spun an extraordinary scheme. He provisionally conferred the title Duke of Richmond and Somerset upon his illegitimate son by Elizabeth Bessie Blount. The boy, named Henry Fitzroy, literally son of the king, in the old tongue, was thrust into the role of prospective heir. But the king's ambitions extended further. He planned to marry Fitzroy to his half-sister Mary, forming a solid bloodline alliance and averting the risk of civil war should he die without a male successor. That plan sent shockwaves through Christendom when the Pope, who had previously refused Henry's request to annul his marriage to Catherine, suddenly looked the other way and approved the proposed union of brother and sister. Western Catholics were stunned. For centuries the Church had condemned incestuous marriages. Yet it now bowed to the English king's extraordinary demand. Rumours spread swiftly, casting the match as emblematic of moral decay and excessive royal privilege, prompting many bishops and scholars to react with cautious disapproval. Fortuitously, the prospect of a sibling marriage never came to pass. Henry Fitzroy was hurriedly wed instead to a woman outside the Tudor bloodline in a ceremony designed to save the monarchy's honour. The headstrong youth seemed equally disinterested in his role as future sovereign and soon withdrew into a quiet life with his common-born wife. The grisly plan to wed Mary to her brother was indefinitely shelved, sparing the princess the stigma of a consanguineous union. Yet relinquishing this incestuous strategy did not end Henry VIII's anxieties over succession. Fitzroy's fragile health persisted, and he died at the age of 17. Leaving the court in mourning, Princess Mary ultimately gained the freedom to marry for love. But even after choosing another husband, she bore the lasting sorrow of her half-brother's death. The Tudor dynasty concluded with Henry's 3 legitimate children, Edward, Mary, and Elizabeth, each ruling in turn yet failing to produce a male heir, thus propelling the English crown into further upheaval. This dramatic chapter lays bare 2 stark contrasts: the image of the young warrior, king in his prime, and the mortal, vulnerable man, confounded by questions of inheritance. All the wealth and absolute power at his disposal could not stave off regret or defy the course of life and death. Indeed, Henry VIII's peculiar machinations over his heir reveal his profound contradictions, utterly ruthless in his ambitions, yet tormented by anxieties over bloodline and the kingdom's future. When Henry Fitzroy, the illegitimate son born to Henry VIII outside of marriage, died at the age of 17. The door to the throne that had briefly opened for him immediately closed forever. Fitzroy's sudden passing not only marked the end of any hope for a spare prince, but also forced the Tudor dynasty to place its entire trust in Edward, Mary, and Elizabeth, the king's 3 legitimate children. Yet even after the question of succession was momentarily resolved, Henry VIII continued to sow terror with the hidden swords of his terrible crimes beneath the cloak of his power. People spoke of Henry VIII as the ice-hearted king, not only because he ordered the execution of his former wives or abandoned close friends in fits of rage, but also because of the horrifying speed and finality with which he carried out those executions. A single flicker of anger transformed the throne into a judgment seat, where the king's hands could swiftly sever the heads of those who had once stood by him, from Anne Boleyn to Thomas More. Those who were once dear to him paid the ultimate price for his irresistible wrath, as if he alone were the center of the universe. So, what twisted a once valiant young monarch into a merciless slayer of the innocent? Many scholars hypothesize that it was the deadly combination of syphilis, a severe head injury from a hunting accident, and hereditary factors that ignited the mad flame in Henry's mind. Syphilis, with its attendant neurological damage, may have made the king's temperament increasingly erratic and brutal. A horrific fall from his horse during a hunt likewise left him with cranial trauma, triggering episodes of uncontrollable violence. Hereditary predisposition further propelled Henry into his cycle of cruelty. His great-grandmother, Catherine of Valois, had been the daughter of Charles VI of France, known in history as the Mad King, plagued by delusions and bouts of insanity. The Valois family's mental afflictions passed down to their descendants and spread into Tudor blood. This lineage reveals that Henry's rage was more than a personal trait. It was the outburst of a mad gene deeply rooted across generations. From the French court to Renaissance England, and even onward to George III, the deeper one investigates, the more apparent it becomes that Henry VIII was not solely responsible for his own atrocities. That mad blood, inherited from mother to son, created a being who thirsted for violence. Where instinct and reason waged war within his brain, every time he nodded to approve an execution, it was not merely a political decree, but the roar of a family condemned by its own genetic destiny. It was this fusion of disease, injury, and inheritance that transformed Henry into an icon of tyranny. People still recall the day Anne Boleyn bowed her head at the block, while he, once a man who poured his love into music and nurtured sparks of hope for his dynasty, became the judge of his most loyal subjects. Thomas More, who once held the highest office in the realm, offered no plea for mercy before the blade, proving that Henry's fury knew no bounds. To the European public, Henry embodied the adage, absolute power corrupts absolutely. Yet it was precisely this that revealed the tragedy lurking within the Tudor throne, a crown placed upon the shoulders of a man already burdened by royal madness, under whose splendor lay anxiety and spilled blood. Henry VIII spread terror, not out of mere personal hatred, but as an inseparable part of the horrifying legacy he inherited and intensified. Therefore, when we look back on Henry VIII's reign, we cannot simply condemn him as a savage. On the contrary, we may see him as an unwilling victim of blood-stained lineage, whose reason was sometimes swept away by genetically driven rage. One might hate him for his cold executions, yet also feel some sympathy for a soul that combined musical genius with royal madness. Ultimately, Henry VIII's tragedy lies not only in the deaths of his wives, children, and friends, but also within himself. A king who was both the stern judge and the victim of his own heritage. That mad blood seems to remind us that behind glory and power, there always lurk irreparable fits of rage, ready to erupt at any moment and terrify a continent. Such was the life of Henry VIII, a regal tragedy scripted by generations past, placed upon the shoulders of a man unable to escape his own fate. Following his calculated and ruthless strides on the battlefield, Henry VIII harboured another extraordinary passion, transforming every horse into a living work of art beneath his saddle. From his youth, he had been enamoured with riding. Yet, under his reign, Henry accepted no limits. He invited renowned dressage masters from Italy to England, importing the era's most advanced equestrian techniques. Basic movements like the piaffe and passage were merely introductions. The capriole, where the horse leaps into the air and lands in perfect balance, was the dazzling centerpiece that astonished all of Europe and underscored royal authority. At each performance on the grassy field, Henry erected platforms of wood draped in velvet for the nobility, while commoners jostled at the fencing, eager to witness the king vault into the saddle, flexing his knees to cue the horse to spring into flight. The thunder of hooves sounded like distant thunder. Dust clouds billowed in every direction, and the mingled scents of horsehide, wild grass, and sandalwood from the king's own person awakened every sense, compelling every spectator to marvel at his power and regal command. Though his figure grew portly with age and illness, Henry's imposing presence on horseback remained undeniable. The sight of the burly king, clad in gleaming silver armour, wielding a gold-plated leather crop, astride a jet-black Andalusian adorned with jewelled tack, became the ultimate symbol of supremacy. The horse beneath him was not merely a mode of transport, but a political instrument. With every display of equestrian artistry, Henry reaffirmed his dominion, sending the message, "I am not only king upon the throne, but lord over beasts themselves, taming the fiercest creatures." Ha! This bold devotion also drove him to test his finest steeds under the burden of his massive weight. Many horses collapsed under the excessive load, and the sound of splintered hooves haunted the cavaliers. Nevertheless, Henry maintained brutal training regimens, demanding strength, agility, and absolute obedience. Any horse that failed was relegated to the outer stables, while the victors received lavish rewards, sweetbread and ornate, mother-of-pearl inlaid saddles. Beyond technique, Henry VIII commissioned celebrated artists to paint equestrian portraits, creating a gallery at his palace to preserve the memory of each spectacular capriole. He collected shed hairs from the horses, inlaid them into bridle plates, and fashioned commemorative jewellery and medallions. Whenever he appeared, the king wore meticulously engraved armour and had his steed stride over a crimson carpet, an evocative testament to his mastery over both nature and beast. Henry's love of horses extended to landscaping vast tracts of wilderness into grand riding grounds. In Hoot Park, St. James's Park, and Hampton Court, he levelled hills, planted smooth turf, and built a royal equestrian arena, reminiscent of a modern Daytona track, where he and dozens of noble students trained weekly. These grounds were more than leisure venues. They became proving grounds for future generations, where courtiers learned to respect the power and poise of the horse. Yet behind this shimmering pageantry lay tragic episodes. There was the wooden fence that splintered under the king's weight, nearly sending him to his death. The prized European warhorse worth 4 heads of cattle whose legs snapped attempting a capriole, forcing it to spend its final days in quiet confinement. Still, Henry was undeterred. To him, each drop of blood and drop of sweat shed on a saddle was the clearest proof of absolute power and unassailable pride. By bringing Italian dressage to England, Henry VIII not only elevated horseback riding into a royal art form, but also asserted his status on the international stage. News of his daring vaults and aerial leaps was recorded in the chronicles and spread across Europe as evidence of a king who was both ruthless and artistically majestic. And though more than 5 centuries have passed, the image of Henry astride his steed, brimming with indomitable spirit, remains etched in our collective memory as an unmistakable emblem of a triumphant and blood-soaked era. Continuing from his dazzling feats on horseback, we now turn to the romantic and reformist side of Henry VIII, where he was both a man intoxicated by love and a visionary of medical reform. From the very first tentative steps with Anne Boleyn, Henry did not hesitate to pour out his feelings in tear-soaked letters and excruciatingly sentimental language. He styled himself, "My mistress and friend," earnestly placing both his heart and himself in her hands. In one famous passage, Henry wrote, "Wishing myself, specially in evening, in my sweetheart's arms, whose duckies I trust shortly to kiss." That innocent-sounding word, duckies, was his deliberate euphemism for Anne's bosom, making the letter at once passionate and somewhat peculiar. It is said that Anne smiled shyly at the time, unable to imagine that this mighty king could be so vulnerable and overwrought with emotion. But do not imagine Henry was merely wrapped up in courtly love. He was also likened to a Renaissance Bernie Sanders for his bold vision of medical reform. In the year 1522, he founded the Royal College of Physicians, laying the groundwork for physician licensing and the strict regulation of medical practice. 9 years later, he enacted 7 statutes detailing the training, certification, and even the fees that physicians could charge for consultations. Those regulations remained unchanged for nearly 3 centuries, a testament to their durability and far-reaching impact. In the year 1540, Henry went even further by passing a law to control drug pricing. Previously, apothecaries had freely hiked their prices, leaving patients in dire straits. The king immediately decreed that every medicine must have a fixed maximum price, with severe penalties for any violations. This measure not only protected ordinary people from price gouging, but also spurred apothecaries to improve their craft, since competition now hinged not on price, but on skill. These medical reforms were not mere royal edicts. Henry demonstrated genuine commitment by appointing Sir Thomas More, who would later become one of his own tragic victims as Commissioner of Sewers. Under More's direction, London's sewer system, once stagnant and heavily polluted, was overhauled. Canals were dredged, new brick-lined conduits were laid, and floodwaters and tidal backflow no longer inundated the streets with waste. As a result, the city's drinking water was transformed from a death trap into a safe resource, and public health advanced markedly. Today, if you stroll through Hyde Park, St. James's Park, or Regent's Park, you are enjoying Henry VIII's verdant legacy. He expended thousands of acres to turn barren fields into royal parks venues for riding, promenading, and lavish picnic gatherings. Those smooth lawns and shaded avenues stand as living proof of his long-term vision. From medical reform to the creation of public spaces, Henry laid the groundwork for a modern, clean, and people-friendly city. It is in the convergence of artistic brilliance, tearful letters, and reformist decrees that Henry VIII emerges as a multifaceted figure. He was not merely the ice-hearted king wielding blood-stained swords against wives and friends, but also the founder of English medicine, the architect of grand parks, and the protector of ordinary people's rights against medical exploitation. This contrast inspires both horror and admiration. Over centuries, Henry VIII's legacy endure. Magnifiques palaces, vast parks, subterranean sewer networks, and even dusty manuscripts preserving his sweet confessions to Anne Boleyn. They testify to a king of contradictions, barbarously ruthless, yet unafraid to use his power for the benefit of his people. And through this very blend of seemingly opposing elements, Henry VIII entered history not only as a bloodthirsty demon, but also as a symbol of change and progress, albeit through bloody means. The dusk gradually slipped away behind the cold stone arches of the palace, yielding to a night draped in black velvet and dotted with twinkling stars. In that hushed expanse, Henry VIII stood stripped of steel armor and distant from his throne, a flesh-and-blood man with a heart torn between 2 poles, the yearning for genuine affection and the heavy burden of sovereignty. When the flickering candlelight danced across his troubled face, Henry closed his eyes and sought the warmth of sweet memories with Anne Boleyn. It was one of the rare moments in which he lived true to his emotions, not as the king who beheaded traitors, but as a man ready to entrust his entire being to the soft hands of his lover. Yet with every heartbeat, he heard the turning wheel of history dragging him back toward royal duty, making each breath heavy with the scars of inner conflict. Henry wondered, if he could rewrite everything, would he begin with an apology or a vow? The schism between the lover intoxicated by passion and the monarch who laid down laws for an entire realm whirled in his mind like two waves crashing on a rocky shore, endlessly colliding and forming fractures that would not easily heal. Each night, when his chamber door closed, echoes from the past would resound again, the whisper of pen on parchment, the sweet invocation, "My mistress and friend," and the proud clang of the statutes he had sanctioned. At the window frame, the night breeze drifted in, carrying herbal scents from the ancient gardens beyond, conjuring memories of his tireless work on medical reforms. Henry inhaled that fragrance as a reminder, whether he won a woman's heart or saved hundreds of thousands of lives, his responsibilities would never end. He tilted his head and listened to the gentle jingle of the silver bells on the bridle of the horse in the courtyard, as if the sound itself asked, "Who are you when sovereignty and love both rise within you?" Within the silent palace, Henry felt like a cracked crystal vase among ironclad authorities. Each fissure represented an irreparable shard of memory. Anne's shy smile as she read of Duki's, the king's cold decree against a betrayer, the steady hand that signed legislation protecting fields and hospitals. Those fragments of recollection fell and shattered upon the stone floor, leaving him simultaneously proud and pierced by unbearable pain. Henry wondered whether he could reconcile those two selves, the whispering lover and the great reformer. He knew that love was the gentlest power of all, yet it made one most vulnerable. His longing for affection had led him to believe that power could sweep away all doubt, but then power had taught him that only resolve and severity could maintain order. Those two lessons tore at him, brewing a storm within his heart. Dreams of Anne and a peaceful future for millions of subjects would briefly awaken, only to be extinguished by the harsh torchlight of court intrigue. Where political strategy often outweighed sentiment, Henry found himself caught between two worlds. On one side, warm laughter and the inviting scent of candlelight. On the other, the relentless thunder of hooves, the shouts of soldiers, and the uncompromising commands from the throne. The surroundings seemed to sympathize with his anguish. A moss-clad wall bore deep scars like memories etched in time. A rose garden shed petals to remind him of a love undone. Each gust of wind through the window whispered, "If you do not love, you cannot understand the loneliness of power." Henry nodded slightly, as though acknowledging his own tragedy. Strength could not erase the need to be loved, and love could not conceal the weighty demands of duty. In that final moment before night consumed everything, Henry pressed a finger to his brow. Feeling each heartbeat as a bridge between opposing poles, he murmured to himself, "I would rather be weak than callous." But the throne allowed no weakness. A faint echo from his crown seemed to urge him upright, to lock away his emotions in secrecy, and then to step out of the chamber with the bearing of an unshakable king. That fleeting scene elevated Henry to a new realm, the realm of tragic self-awareness. He knew that whenever he succumbed to love, power would demand its price. Whenever he displayed absolute authority, his heart would yearn for a moment of peace. It was not his fault, but the destiny of one seated between a throne and an embrace, and it was precisely that inner conflict that rendered Henry VIII an immortal figure, a king both savage and tenderly romantic, a master of law and medicine, yet a man so thirsty for affection he could weep. That is a tragedy not unique to him alone, but one shared by anyone who wields power and craves love, a longing that no throne can conceal. One remarkable aspect that made Henry VIII so conspicuous was his decision to sever the Church of England from the authority of the Roman Curia. Although he later became the Pope's fiercest opponent, no one would have guessed that in his youth he had been an ardent supporter of Roman Catholicism. Pope Leo X, once bestowed upon Henry the title Defensor Fidei, Defender of the Faith, to praise his steadfast loyalty to the Holy See. The sonorous tolling of church bells and the scent of incense that once filled the air had been his pride, the very breath of unwavering faith coursing through the veins of England's future Duke, when he sought a divorce from Catherine of Aragon in order to marry a new wife who might bear him a son. Henry was rebuffed by the Vatican, precipitating a religious crisis. His pride was shattered like an iceberg cleft in mid-Atlantic. The opulent chambers of the palace changed hue. The warm glow of candlelight splashed coldly against stone walls, and the throne's shadow took on a sombre grey. In his mind rang out a strangled roar. I must walk my own path. A sacred fire of resolve blazed within him, igniting the belief that only he possessed the authority to determine the fate of faith in England. That decision arose not merely from injustice suffered, but from a deep yearning to control his own destiny. Henry no longer saw himself as a mere prince, but as a majestic pontiff. His heart raced with the vibrations of newfound power, part warrior laying down political order, par pastor unveiling doctrine. As the bells of Westminster Abbey tolled their announcement of change, each grey stone seemed to understand the historic message, whispering, "Here begins a new era." This act did more than mark a watershed in English history. It inaugurated the age of Anglicanism, severing ties with Rome's influence and bequeathing a lasting religious heritage to generations to come. The doors of ancient churches opened wide like eagles' wings, welcoming the new faith. The echoes of Anglican liturgy rose in soft murmurs like a mountain stream, evoking warmth and familiarity. Yet beneath this comforting clamour lay inner turmoil. Henry VIII craved freedom of conscience, yet feared losing his network of allies across Europe. By day, he sat upon his throne holding the Great Seal as supreme head of the Church of England, his pride swelling. Sunlight on his splendid vestments seemed to extend his authority boundlessly, but when night fell, solitary footsteps echoed through the palace corridors. Henry gazed at the star-strewn sky through a lofty window. Once believing the Roman god to be the only deity, now he claimed to be God's sole representative. The loneliness of his exalted position hung in every hallway like a thin veil of mist upon stained glass. This transformation unleashed fierce inner conflict. On one hand, Henry felt exalted by his defiance of Vatican power. On the other, his lips tightened and his heart bled at thoughts of his forefathers' unbroken faith. While reading the English prayer book, he would occasionally pause, his gaze distant as if seeking the old solace. Yet immediately the drumbeats of a new service would arise, reminding him there was no turning back from his chosen path. Outside the palace gardens lay silent, the soft rustle of falling leaves heralding autumn. Golden leaves drifted down as if offering him a message of reconciliation. No wall cannot be bridged. Henry opened his arms to catch the drifting leaves, telling himself, I must unite ancient faith and new law. In that instant, his heart softened for a moment, before the weight of royal duty submerged every stirring feeling. Nevertheless, the legacy of his schism endures robustly. From the first English-language Bible to Gothic church, vaults imbued with fresh solemnity, Anglican clergy, clad in deep blue vestments, walked solemnly over patterned stone floors. Embracing their steadfast mission, Henry watched them with a lingering thought. I am not only the king of the people, but the bearer of the torch of faith. Each toll of the bell echoed his inner voice. On one side, love for the Pope. On the other, a solitary pride in his unique authority. Finally, when Henry VIII issued his formal declaration, all eyes fixed upon the throne. The dazzling glow of the candles on the altar mirrored the revolutionary spirit. He was inscribing a new chapter of English history with his royal signature. From that moment, the Church of England rose to independence, its liturgy resounding across the realm, and Henry's legacy as a daring king remained eternal. He opened a new page of history while carving into the hearts of his people the complex soul of a ruler where faith and power met in an everlasting, tragic harmony. Music was also a burning passion for Henry VIII, an aspect often overshadowed by the brutal image of a monarch. He did not merely sit upon the throne, but was known as the artist prince, thanks to his ability to compose music, sing tenor, and sight-read a score at first glance. The music hall within Hampton Court Palace was forever aglow with candlelight, its walls reflecting 154 recorders stacked like wooden fireworks. 19 vials stretched out like colossal stringed beasts, inlaid with silver and garnet, each vibration a reminder of the king's wealth and his loneliness. Upon entering that chamber, Henry would inhale the scent of cedar wood, mingled with the warm, honeyed aroma of beeswax from the hanging lamps. His hand would lightly brush the first recorder, a piece of polished ebony as smooth as a lover's skin, and he would recall those midnight letters in which he called for dookies from Anne Boleyn. Each breath in that hall rose and fell like a prelude, pounding in his chest with a desire to merge with the melody itself. Sometimes he sat motionless, listening to the wind drifting through the window, imagining that very air carrying humanity's music, closing the gap between the throne and his heart. At dusk, Henry would embrace the virginals, the crude forerunner of the harpsichord, placing his fingers on the ivory keys and feeling each pulse of his own heart. The first notes would tremble like dewdrops in dawn light, then cascade into a haunting prelude. As the virginal's gentle song filled the room, even the breeze on the balcony would hush, as if straining to hear the king's soul. In that perfect stillness, sorrow and hope converged. The solitude of a ruler without love and the longing for a free, wandering life. There is an enduring, though unverified, rumour that Henry VIII composed the melody Greensleeves in his youth, a sweet, plaintive love song, redolent of green leaves and sap. He is said to have played its opening bars on a recorder, murmuring its tender lyrics for a distant beloved. Whenever the tune echoed through the hall, the ladies-in-waiting lowered their eyes, sympathy shining in their gaze. How far did the heart of this glamorous king reach? That melody became a bridge between his idyllic memories and the anxieties of the present. Under Henry's ring, court music was no mere pastime, but a brilliant symbol of Renaissance cultural exchange. He invited Italian masters of harpsichord, harp, and liturgical chant to England. The strum of mandolins and lutes sounded like a Mediterranean breeze upon the damp shores of Albion. From languid sonatas to exuberant madrigals, Henry eagerly introduced contrapuntal technique into the vaulted chamber of Westminster Abbey. Premieres took place in the Great Hall, with nobles and courtiers leaning forward in rapture or bursting into thunderous applause. Italian music wound its way through mirrors, across ornamental saddles, and even into the footsteps of mounted knights. Henry took pride in having made England a crossroads of European art, laying the foundation for the later English Baroque tradition, which would produce the likes of Purcell and Handel. Every note he penned into a manuscript was more than a melody. It was a declaration. This kingdom knew not only how to behead its enemies, but also how to feel the heights of artistic creation. Yet, at his core, music was also a balm for Henry's soul. When faced with decisions of execution or ecclesiastical exile, he could still find solace in a low chord, believing that humanity was born not only to rule, but also to perceive beauty. Under the moonlight streaming through the great banquet hall's windows, Henry would sit alone at the virginals, his fingers gliding swiftly over the keys as though administering a tonic to his wounded heart. As the harmonic progression shifted key, he imagined a dawn of hope, if only for a fleeting moment. Music became a mirror of his mood. When he was tense, the harmonies twisted and surged. When nostalgic, the melodies trailed off in delicate inflection. When resolute, the rhythms throbbed like charging cavalry. Each night, Henry added a few notes, linked phrases together, marked up his draft, and signed it Henricus Rex. To him, composing music was no different from drafting a royal decree. Every note mattered, and every rest held its own power. When a concert ended, and the palace fell silent. Only the last lingering note remained an echo as faint as a dying breath. Henry would stand on the empty dais, listening to music's reverberations against stone walls. In that hush, he realized that royal authority and musical authority did not conflict, but complemented each other. The throne required melody to soothe the hearts of subjects, and music needed the throne to spread across Europe. Although few of Henry's musical manuscripts survived, their afterglow remains. The image of him framed in a Tudor window, holding a recorder with dawn's crimson skies behind him, endures as a portrait of a king, both fierce and contemplative, a court artist where harmony and the sword meet. Music granted Henry VIII a means to express his multifaceted soul, preserving the memory of love's fleeting bloom, finding serenity amid political storms, and sowing the seeds of England's artistic flowering to come. It stands as vivid proof that beneath the gilded grandeur of power there beat a sensitive heart, yearning eternally to resonate through the corridors of history. Henry VIII's relationships with his two sisters, Margaret and Mary, reveal a tangled family dynamic in which he was at once both a protective brother and an all-powerful monarch. Margaret Tudor, Princess of Scotland, was sent north at the age of 13 to strengthen a political alliance. Yet deep down, she longed for her brother's lavish financial and social support. Henry remembered her silhouette among the palace rose gardens, where petals carpeted the grass like emotional debts he was obliged to bear. Each letter from Margaret warmed his heart with her faith in him, even as it weighed heavy with royal responsibility. The evening breeze carried the faint scent of roses, as if nature itself murmured, "You may forsake the winter's chill, but you cannot abandon the obligations of kinship." Mary Tudor, the youngest sister, had been a French princess in an arranged marriage to the aging King Louis XII. When political tempests passed and Louis closed his eyes, Mary defied convention. She secretly took holy orders, shorn her hair, then wed Charles Brandon, an adventurous but common noble, in a clandestine union. News of that sneak marriage enraged Henry like a hurricane smashing against an impregnable wall. He ordered incense to burn furiously, stamping out Mary's heady defiance as if it were an unwelcome scent. The palace fell into suffocating silence, save for the thunderous drumbeat of his fury. "You have betrayed blood ties and royal interests." Beneath the golden torchlight, cold sweat traced his face, revealing the man who was both beloved brother and decisive monarch. His absolutism in family marriages mirrored his style of rule. Henry VIII was the first English king to be addressed as "Your Majesty," a title borrowed from the Latin majestas, conveying ultimate power on par with the divine. Whenever he issued a royal decree, the throne seemed to tremble, and the palace reverberated with the echo of his authority. The drop of the seal, the wax impression bearing the single word "Majesty," fell upon parchment, instantly transforming into an unchallengeable command. The bells of Westminster Abbey pealed forth as affirmation that under Henry's crown no one dared dream of defiance. At court receptions, his gaze would sweep across velvet gowns, making courtiers' hearts flutter. No one may detach themselves from this power. Yet alongside the image of a stern supreme judge, Henry VIII harbored an unusual passion for dogs. He earned the nickname the Dog King for his pack of sleek greyhounds and clever beagles. Each black velvet kennel, trimmed in gold braid, welcomed dogs dressed in bespoke silk coats, made small enough for dolls. Henry decreed that his dogs eat only white bread and fresh vegetables to prevent biting people, transforming the stable yard into a neatly ordered canine nursing home. Each morning, when dew still clung to the grass, his footsteps echoed on the gravel path like a cheerful melody, and the dogs wagged their tails in joyous greeting, warming a strange corner of his heart. The pinnacle of his love for hunting dogs came when Henry VIII presented 400 trained warhounds to the Holy Roman Emperor. Shalzi. That bizarre gift was more than a token of friendship. It was psychological warfare. The dogs would circle, tense, ready to spring upon enemy lines like invisible arrows. The image of 400 canine silhouettes proved the most uncanny and fearsome regiment in 16th century Europe. Amid the storms of war, Henry would watch his pack and laugh, seeing in them a reflection of himself, a king who knew how to wield both love and power to guard and to drive off foes. When night fell, and the palace's lamps cast a flickering glow, Henry sat on a stone step, stroking the silky neck of his closest greyhound. The night breeze sifted through the columns, stirring a few dry blossoms as if to tell the story of a conflicted heart. A man who wielded the hammer of justice, yet knew only tenderness with dogs. The soft patter of a beagle's tiny paws on stone made him sigh, perhaps the echo of his own soul, torn between a throne's might and a fragile heart. In that absolute silence, Henry smiled and murmured, "I have conquered a kingdom, yet it seems only these dogs have truly captured my heart." How Henry VIII not only made waves with his political decisions and his scandalous court life, but he also earned lasting fame as the true dog king. His greatest passion was keeping hunting dogs, particularly two breeds he adored most, greyhounds and beagles. His slender, sharp-eyed greyhounds wore velvet collars embroidered with gold thread, and he even commissioned them bespoke silk capes. The beagles, small and mischievous, were constant companions on his rides and hunts, lending a warm, familiar air to the grandeur of the palace grounds. Henry was astute about preserving both camaraderie and discipline among his pack. He imposed a strict vegetarian diet, feeding them only white bread and fresh vegetables, no meat to prevent them from biting, and to maintain their trim figures. This reverse keto regimen surprised many courtiers, but proved remarkably effective. His hounds rarely fell ill and retained the lean, powerful build. Essential for the chase, his devotion extended beyond mere collecting. Anyone who returned a lost dog to him received lavish rewards, gold coins, fine fabrics, or generous sums of money, a testament to his boundless love and indulgence. Each dog bore a royal moniker, as he dubbed Meatball for its round form and Beatrice for her elegant bearing. Though those names lack strict historical attestation, they live on as symbols of the king's softer side in later memory. Henry's passion for his hound pack reveals a humane dimension that sharply contrasts with the ice-hearted king portrayed in many histories. Within him lived two selves, a ruthless leader when duty demanded it, and a tender heart eager to share affection with the smallest living creatures around him. This tension underscores the complex character of the Tudor sovereign. From the highest tower of Hampton Court, Henry surveyed the morning garden where his hunting dogs gathered on a broad sweep of cobblestones. The pale dawn light filtering through the leaves set their coats aglow with amber streaks. The greyhounds stood like silver-armed knights, necks outstretched to scent the air, while the beagles hopped about his feet, eyes bright with delight. The sight alone, even for a king unaccustomed to displaying emotion, could soften his stern heart. Henry leaned close to Meatball and murmured, "Today you shall run swifter than the wind." His voice carried excitement and a touch of wistfulness. Only in the company of his dogs did he find a sincerity he rarely encountered elsewhere. A lifetime of stratagems, power struggles, and bloodshed fell away in those moments. With his pack, he was simply a leader and a friend, not an iron-hearted monarch. When the guards flung open the garden gates to begin the hunt, each greyhound was fitted with a sash bearing its name, akin to a knight donning his ceremonial sash. Henry's command rang out, "Let us give chase together today," at the sound of his whistle. The dogs burst forth like streaks of light, shattering the morning calm. The memory transported him back to campaigns on horseback, his pursuit of power mirrored by this wilderness chase. Yet unlike soldiers, the hounds schemed not, they obeyed only by pure instinct. Henry watched their pounding strides and measured breaths, feeling the pulse of freedom in their chests, freedom that even he, burdened by the crown, must sometimes temper to avoid tragedy. After the hunt, as the pack clustered on the dew-wet lawn, Henry produced loaves of bread, slicing them carefully into small portions. He took pride in their measured feasts, no clumsy tearing, no growls of greed. Beatrice, the clever beagle, often pressed her muzzle against his hand in thanks. Henry would smile and stroke her delicate ears, an act capable of dispelling every care of state. Those tranquil interludes were Henry's most cherished gift. After political machinations, marriages and divorces, he could cast off his crown for a few hours and live according to his own feelings. The rustle of leaves, the gentle breathing of his hounds, it all reminded him of a primal home, untainted by steel or gunpowder. On one occasion, a stray pack fled the nearby forest and bounded into the village at the hill's base. Villagers scrambled to capture them and return them to the court. Upon hearing this, Henry instantly rewarded the finder with treasures of gold, and he ordered the court's minstrels to slow the procession's music in the village. A sweet-voiced rebuke, he understood the heartbreak of losing privilege. Lost dogs, too, lost their home and wandered among strangers. By treating them kindly, Henry reminded himself of the need for empathy. The palace at night was usually hushed, but the hounds never lay silent. They curled on furs, breathing softly as if whispering their own tales. Henry would visit them before retiring. In the flicker of lantern light, their coats appeared muted, yet their loyal eyes shone, undimmed. He would think, only these dogs have shown me love unbound by condition. That love accompanied Henry to his final days. As old age ravaged his body, his pack remained ever at his bedside, an unflagging guard of honor. It is said that in his will, he instructed the royal household to care for them diligently, and to pass that affection on to future generations for a dynasty that loses its canine heart risks. Losing a vital piece of its humanity, Henry VIII's legacy as the Dog King is more than palace paintings or courtly lore. It reflects the multifaceted heart of a man capable of issuing death warrants, yet tenderly brushing a hound's fur. It is this poignant contradiction that makes the Tudor king unforgettable. Fierce, yet gentle. A figure of ruthless power and simple affection. Deeply conflicted, yet strangely endearing in the company of his beloved dogs. In the complex context of European warfare and alliances, the most unusual gift, Henry VIII, bestowed upon the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, who was the nephew of his first wife. Catherine of Aragon was a formidable army of 400 fully trained hunting dogs. This gesture served not merely as a diplomatic token of friendship, but also as psychological warfare. The capability to deploy a canine corps to intimidate an enemy's morale during sieges or surprise assaults. The idea of using dogs as a military unit may sound odd. But during the Renaissance, many European powers experimented with exotic war tactics, including armored war elephants in Italy and white horses in ceremonial cavalry. Henry's pack was chosen with meticulous care. Only sleek greyhounds with powerful muscles and beagles with keen noses were selected. They were outfitted with sturdy yet supple leopard skin leather leads, and fitted with muzzles to prevent accidental bites to allies or civilians. From tracking scents to guarding positions, and even coordinating attacks alongside cavalry. Each dog learned commands via Henry's special whistle. Trainers even staged mock assaults to condition their reflexes, repeating counterattack drills so that in real combat no dog would hesitate. The synchronization of man and animal in battle struck opponents as both staggering and bewildering. Picture a formidable cavalry charge advancing in unison, only to be interspersed with 400 hounds hurtling forward, claws and teeth bared, hooves and paws pounding in tandem enough to strike terror into any soldier's heart. This tactic not only sabotaged the enemy's spirit, but sent a clear message. Henry VIII transcended all conventional military traditions, willing to harness even the smallest creatures to safeguard his realm. This remarkable gift helped forge his image as king of all creatures, as Henry deftly merged his love of animals with foreign policy. He transformed the royal ballroom into a stage for his Beast Battalion, where visiting ambassadors would watch the hounds march in perfect formation, tails wagging in greeting, executing flawless obedience. That spectacle entered the annals as a singular strategic statement, leaving historians both astonished and admiring of the Tudor king's audacity and unique vision. Yet behind this dazzling display lay Henry's deeper calculation. He fully grasped crowd psychology. When the populace and nobility witnessed such a bizarre scene, they remembered not only the king's affection for animals, but also his absolute authority. The notion that a monarch could command the very lives and deaths of beasts implied he held the same power over human foes. Thus, his four-legged army cemented his inviolable prestige. For Henry, no limit existed on power when he could wield either sword or leash as instruments of war. From a psychological standpoint, Henry repurposed animals that might otherwise have been mere hunting tools into a strategic combat force. When addressing ambassadors and diplomats, he unabashedly boasted of his canine training corps staffed by former Napier soldiers experienced in intelligence operations, as though it were an elite special forces unit. Whenever he spoke of his warhounds, his eyes shone with pride. He had ingrained in his adversaries' minds the notion that this king even exploits animals as weapons, leaving them in awe or fear, beyond strategy. The gift struck a personal chord. Charles V, being Catherine of Aragon's nephew, felt both honoured and uneasy upon receiving 400 hunting dogs. He understood Henry had not forgotten their familial grievance, and was subtly reminding him, "I can strike by blade or by fang." It was a masterstroke of psychological leverage, ensuring Charles proceeded with caution in every diplomatic exchange with England. Moreover, Henry showed genuine care for each four-legged soldier. Before dispatching them, he ensured provisions of food and medicine pouches were readied, and even assigned each dog a military-style name: Captain Swift, Sergeant Hunter, Corporal Brave. In dispatches to English commanders, he eagerly detailed his Beast Battalion's exploits, concluding with, "Look after them as you would your own officers, for they are indeed part of the kingdom's strength." Oh, when word of the Wagging Tail Brigade spread across Europe, many courts sent delegations to England for first-hand witness. They had to offer lavish gifts just for a glimpse of Henry and his favoured pack. That encounter only magnified the image of a monarch both eccentric and shrewd, prompting generations to recall no sovereign had ever gifted 400 hunting dogs as a diplomatic overture. In Henry's mind, each time he recalled the spectacle before his rivals, he felt both satisfaction at the psychological coup and the pure delight of a child embraced by a pack of gentle hounds. Amid the whirl of power and war, only his love for animals granted him a sanctuary where all calculations fell away, leaving only friendly barks and wagging tails. Historians typically remember Henry VIII for his furious rages and the executions of wives and counsellors. Yet those with a keener sense discern that it was his persona as Dog King, with his pack of 400 hunting dogs, that rendered him unique, a test of spirit for Henry himself. Could he be both the merciless king and the faithful friend to creatures? The answer shines in the unwavering loyalty in their eyes, in their joyous charge across the battlefield, and in the lesson that true strength sometimes lies in melding power with compassion for one's four-legged friends. Alongside his passions for hunting, keeping hounds, and roaming his many estates, Henry VIII proved himself a polymathic monarch, overseeing healthcare reform, regulating medicine, and fostering the growth of court music. He founded the Royal College of Physicians and enacted a series of medical statutes, ushering England into a new era of healthcare. At the same time, his overhaul of London's sewer system produced clean water and curtailed epidemics, so that even today the parks he once owned remain ideal promenades for the public. Immediately after signing the medical statutes, Henry routinely visited the palace infirmary, where impoverished patients and wounded soldiers received free treatment He tasked the royal physicians with rigorous training programs that went beyond anatomy and pharmacology to emphasize medical ethics. Physicians were guardians of life, not exploiters of suffering. Each morning, Henry personally reviewed patient statistics, wondering if any souls still awaited care. In his eyes, one saw both concern and pride. Pride in having built an advanced health system, and concern over the countless lives still in need. Parallel to his healthcare initiatives, Henry's sewer project stood among the largest public works in Europe at the time. Under the direction of Sir Thomas More, ancient channels were dredged and new brick conduits laid throughout the city. When rainstorms or tidal surges occurred, wastewater no longer flooded the streets. Whenever citizens strolled through Hyde Park or Regent's Park and breathed the fresh air, a few realized that this waterway had once posed a mortal threat. Henry once paused in quiet reflection when he saw St. James's Lake run clear again, telling himself that he was not merely a decree-issuing sovereign, but also the city's sanitation engineer. That physical well-being provided the foundation for a flourishing of court music, ensembles of more than 150 recorders, viols, and virginals wove harmonious tapestries at ceremonies, processions, and lavish banquets. Henry not only oversaw musician selection, but often performed sacred chant himself, occasionally singing duets with visiting dignitaries. He inscribed each chord into the score with his own signature. Henricus Rex, transforming every madrigal or motet into a personal statement. The solemn, yearning sound beneath the grand vaulted staircases bore the unmistakable influence of Italian Renaissance style, enveloping London in a living, mobile artistry. Beyond music, Henry was a patron of painting and architecture. He invited renowned artists to paint royal portraits and decorate the palace with frescoes depicting hunting scenes, medical care, and courtly life. Visitors were led through galleries where natural light filtered through stained glass windows, creating subtle color effects. Each painting captured a moment, his hand resting upon a medical tome, his fingertips grazing a recorder, or his voice commanding stiff-necked courtiers, reminding all that the eternity of power must walk hand in hand with responsibility. Oh, from granting pardons to penitent criminals at the scaffold, to his determination to wield medical science, music, and art as tools of statecraft. Henry created an indelible archive. His medical manuscripts, Conseil diary, royal edicts, and court records stand as the very building blocks of a modern state dynasty. Each document reminds us that this king was not only the legendary beheader of wives and friends, but also a philosopher king who crafted laws for the welfare of his people and the flourishing of the arts. Within Henry lived two selves in constant interplay. One, the ruthless enforcer of order when necessary. The other, a gentle heart, passionate about science, music, and the preservation of beauty. When he received ambassadors, he could present detailed medical statistics and then break into song that resonated through the hall. His reforms extended beyond politics, embedding themselves in the souls of his subjects, from humble cottages to grand castles, from the smile of a young physician to the plaintive trill of a recorder at night. Thus Henry VIII's legacy is marked by vibrant contradictions, verdant parks, purified waterways, splendid court music, and compassionate medical statutes. Walk today through Westminster, and you may still hear his echo, a king as ready to wield the sword as to extend a healing hand. This multifaceted complexity continues to intrigue posterity. Was Henry VIII a bloodthirsty demon, or a visionary genius ahead of his time? Perhaps the answer lies in the exquisite balance he struck between resolute power and boundless compassion. Henry VIII's legacy also emerges vividly through his profoundly consequential religious decisions, breaking away from the authority of the Roman Curia, founding the Church of England with himself as its supreme head, and abolishing the Pope's ultimate power on English soil. Under the title Defender of the Faith, bestowed upon him by Pope Leo X, before their relationship soured, Henry demonstrated that he was no blind fanatic, but rather a leader who adroitly leveraged religion to consolidate power and affirm sovereignty. From the very outset of his divorce crisis with Catherine of Aragon, Henry understood that separating from Rome would ignite a cascade of upheavals. He set about constructing a domestic ecclesiastical system, appointing bishops, drafting new liturgies, and establishing the organizational structure of the Church of England. Everything was designed to serve the royal will. Henceforth, Supreme Head was not a mere ceremonial title but absolute authority, empowering Henry to grant favor or depose any cleric daring to oppose him. This policy swiftly made the Church of England Europe's most tightly controlled national church, fusing secular power and spiritual authority into a single entity. That religious legacy also endures in royal protocol. Henry was the first English monarch to change the form of address from Your Grace or Your Highness to Your Majesty. The word majesty derives from the Latin majestas, conveying supreme glory and near divinity. When princes, foreign envoys, or generals hailed him as Your Majesty, they not only honored his person, but affirmed the absolute sovereignty he claimed. Henceforth, every English monarch would inherit this style, a historical testament to the complex relationship between the throne and faith. On the urban front, Henry's legacy extended well beyond church and crown. Thousands of acres at Hyde Park, Regent's Park, Green Park, and St. James's Park still bear the imprint of his land acquisitions. Originally intended to expand royal hunting grounds and provide leisure and picnic spaces for the court, these parks ultimately became London's green lungs. When citizens wearied of factory smog and crowded streets, they found refuge on these vast lawns. Listening to birdsong and breathing the fresh air Henry had laid out in the 16th century, that public-spirited dimension was no accident. Henry recognized that his subjects' satisfaction with everyday life formed the bedrock of stable rule. He spent lavishly to transform vacant lands, leveling hills, planting grass, and paving walkways while designing artificial waterways to drain rain. These works both served public health by preventing disease and enhanced his image as a king concerned for the common welfare. From absolute religious authority to healthcare and public spaces, Henry VIII painted a richly colored historical tableau. He earned his reputation as a long-range visionary, not only attending to marriages and alliances, but also caring deeply about his people's health, happiness, and spiritual life. To some scholars, this exemplifies the principle of comprehensive power, authority extending beyond battlefield or court into every aspect of daily existence. The tumultuous yet inspiring era of Henry VIII continues to fuel debate. Some praise him as the founder of modern England, while others condemn him as a tyrant. Yet none can deny that his legacy from the Church of England and the style Your Majesty to the lush parks he established left an indelible mark. Each time one strolls through those wide green spaces or kneels beneath the vault of an Anglican church, one senses the breath of that Tudor king who transformed governance into an art, melding sword and cross, standards and green lawns. Ultimately, Henry VIII embodies the tragedy of royal power, a king who could behead a rebel and yet extend mercy to nascent life. He understood that to endure, the throne must rest on foundations of religion, public health, culture, and communal space, the pillars that bind ruler and ruled. That is the magnificent legacy Henry VIII bequeathed. An England independent in faith, prosperous in public amenities, and resplendent under the Renaissance's artistic glow. Looking back on the Tudor dynasty's trajectory, one cannot deny that Henry VIII was an extraordinary figure, both the embodiment of unparalleled authority and a passionate patron of the arts, who cherished even the smallest creatures. He left his mark on every sphere: law, public health, religion, urban architecture, music, and even the pleasures of hunting with his pack of hounds. First, in the realm of law, Henry VIII demonstrated himself to be a strict yet visionary teacher. From statutes on marriage, divorce, and succession to medical licensing laws and pharmaceutical price controls, he laid the foundations for a relatively unified and rigorous legal system. The break with the Roman Curia was not merely a religious turning point, but a watershed for the rule of law, a nation determined to govern itself and chart its own destiny. Henceforth, anyone who violated the honor of the throne or defied royal command faced uncompromising judgment. Yet within that severity lay the maxim, power must be tempered with responsibility, as Henry did not hesitate to grant pardon to the penitent, revealing a hidden humanitarian streak in his iron hand. In healthcare, Henry is viewed as the pioneer of public medical care. The Royal College of Physicians, the licensing statutes, regulation of medicines, and London's sewer overhaul remain legacies that endured for centuries. He foresaw that the people's health is the foundation of the realm. When his subjects' bodies and minds were cared for, their loyalty would follow. The image of Henry personally reviewing patient reports each morning is indelibly recorded in history, reminding us that a ruler's duty extends beyond issuing decrees to providing care. In religion, Henry VIII was both a revolutionary figure and the source of the greatest controversy. Declaring himself supreme head and establishing the Church of England as fully autonomous marked the birth of a national church closely tied to the crown. To gain that power, he had to sever ties with Rome and plunge England into a protracted religious crisis. Yet his legacy lives on in the style "Your Majesty" and in royal ceremonies to this day. Scholars still debate whether this was a manifestation of personal ambition or a quest for national self-determination. In urban planning, Henry's name is inseparable from London's vast parks. From Hyde Park and Regent's Park to Green Park and St. James's Park, they all originated as royal hunting grounds and pleasure gardens. Rather than leaving them wild, he transformed these barren fields into the city's green lungs, enabling citizens to escape factory smoke and congestion and immerse themselves in nature. His hill leveling, channel dredging, and pathway paving projects reflected a clean, functional, sustainable, urban vision far ahead of its time. In music, Henry VIII was truly the artist prince. His collection of more than 150 recorders, viols, and virginals combined with his ability to compose, sing tenor, and sight read reveals a rare artistic soul. Under his reign, court music became a Renaissance symbol. Blending English tradition with Italian technique, Henry often sang duets with favoured guests and invited foreign musicians, turning London into a roving musical hub. Music served not only for entertainment but as a tool of propaganda, expressing both power and civilization. And one cannot overlook his passion for hunting with hounds. Dubbed the Dog King, Henry raised hundreds of greyhounds and beagles, enforcing an eccentric diet regimen, then employed a canine corps as a psychological weapon in his gift to the Holy Roman Emperor. The image of a monarch both tenderly bonded with animals and strategically deploying them as a force of war astonishes and impresses alike. This contrast between the ice-hearted king and the gentle master of his pets helps us grasp the complexity of Henry's character, sometimes as savage as a tempest, other times as tender and refined as one might never expect. This very paradox has enthralled historians and the public for centuries, fueling ceaseless debate about his legacy. Henry VIII was no ordinary figure. He wielded both sword and pen, capable of beheading a traitor or hosting a lavish feast, embodying extreme multidimensionality. So, what do you think of Henry VIII? Was he the ultimate proof of the adage, absolute power corrupts absolutely? Or a multifaceted historical figure at once detestable and admirable? Leave your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to explore more videos on our channel as we continue our journey through history's strangest and most unique stories.